Okay, so now we're going to actually use Dreamweaver to create that layout. And as always, I like to work in Dreamweaver's split view when I'm doing this, because this lets me see the code on the left-hand side and the actual page layout on the right-hand side. The other thing to point out, as always, I have already set up my site, and I have also created my HTML and also my CSS page. And then I have gone into the HTML page and linked my style sheet to that. So I've done all that already, and I'm more or less ready to just start creating those boxes. And my cursor is blinking right here. You can see in the design view, and you can also see in the code view that the cursor is basically right in the body of the document. And right now there's nothing in the body of the document. So this is where I want to put my main container. So what I do is I go up to the Insert menu and I say Layout Objects, Div Tag. We always want it to say at insertion point, and it should unless something else has gone wrong. So what we do is under ID we type container, and then we don't hit return. Instead we click New CSS Rule. And this is going to then bring up this box that says that this is an ID that we're creating, and remember we use IDs to do page layout. It's showing me the name of my ID, and you might also remember that IDs have a pound sign in front of them, so we don't have to put the pound sign in initially, it adds it for us. And then finally you can see that it's going to save it in my style sheet. So this is all good. So I click OK here. And then this is our familiar box that we've seen when we styled text. But what I want to do is come over here to the box category, because this is where most of the stuff that we're going to want to get at for page layout is. And my container is basically just going to be 920 pixels wide, and it is going to stay centered on the page. So what I do is for width, I say 920 pixels. We normally don't set height. What we do with height is just leave it blank, and then the height will more or less expand depending on what we put inside the box. Now, to make it centered, what we're going to do here is we're going to do margin, and this same for all button allows you to just like type in one number and it puts the same thing all the way around, and that can be handy sometimes, but we don't want that right now. I want to set different margins. So what we're going to do is put left and right at auto, and what that does is it's going to keep this centered in the browser, which remember is what we want. So we've got 920 pixels, we've got left and right of auto. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set 10 pixels of padding all the way around, and what that is going to do is basically keep the boxes from being right up against the edge of the container. Now the final thing I'm going to do, and I'm using colors here just so you can really see what the design looks like, we're going to go into background, and for background color I'm going to type in a hex number that identifies a color, and I have already picked out these colors so I know what I want. So I put in my color there, click OK, and then click OK again. And you can see over here in the design view that it's showing me my container. Right now there's nothing in the container, but you can see the background color. Now what I want to do is I want to do my masthead. And the thing to point out is that all of these other four boxes or divs that I'm going to create need to go inside the container. Okay? So they don't want to be after the container, they need to be inside that container, because I want the container to contain everything. So the way that I do that is over here in code view, I'm going to click right before the end div tag in the container, okay, because I want to be inside the container. If I click here and insert my next div, I'm going to be outside the container. So I definitely want to be here. So with my cursor there, I once again say Insert, Layout Objects, Div Tag, and this ID is going to be the masthead. And we're going to click New CSS Rule. Everything's okay here, so I just skip past this. I go to Box, and I'm going to set my width here for 920 pixels because we want it to be basically as wide as the container is. And let's see here, my height, I'm going to want to have a height on this one of let's say 150 pixels. Okay, and this one I am setting a height because I do want, you know, that masthead to just be a certain height across the top of the page. And really that's all I need to do in this box, but what I also want to do is come to background and set my color for this one. And once again I have a hexadecimal number for this one. And there we go with that. And we click OK. We click OK again. And now you can see there's my masthead inside my container. And you'll also notice that because I put 10 pixels of padding into the container, the masthead isn't right up against the edge of the container, it's got a little bit of space there. So that's good. Okay, next we need to insert the block or the box for the main story. So the main story, and again this is where it can get even more tricky, the main story needs to go after the masthead but still inside the container. So right here is the div that ends the container, and right here is the div that ends the masthead. So what I want to do is click right there, and that's where I want my next div, which is going to be the text story, the main text box, to go. Because I want it to be not inside the masthead, I want it to be after the masthead, but still inside the container. Okay, and I know this is confusing, but it sort of just takes practice and eventually you kind of get the hang of it. So, insert, layout objects, whoops, did the wrong thing there. Insert, layout objects, div tag. My ID is going to be main text. We click new CSS rule. Everything's good there. We come to box. And my width for this is going to be 650 pixels. The other thing we need to add here, because we're going to put two things beside each other, is whenever we're going to want things to be beside each other, we float left. Okay? So what float left does is allows my main text story to be on the left-hand side, and then when we put the sidebar in, it's going to be next to it. We're not going to set a height or anything, and we are not going to do margin or padding or anything for this one. Basically all we need is 650 pixels and float left. I am going to come here to background and set a color for this. And we click OK, and OK again, and now you can see there's my main text. And if I just scroll this back and forth, you can see that the main text isn't going all the way over against the edge of the screen or the edge of the container because it's only 650 pixels wide, which is what we want. So now we do the sidebar. So the sidebar, once again, is going to go after the main text but still inside the container div. So I am going to click right here. So I'm after the main text end div but before the end div for the container. So we click there, we say insert, layout objects, div tag. My ID is going to be sidebar. We click new CSS rule, and this is all good. We come to box, and basically all I'm going to do here is set 250 pixels for width. Once again I'm going to float left because I want it to be basically up against the side of my main text story. I don't need to do anything else there. I just come back here to background to put our color in. There we go. Click OK. OK again, and now you can see there's my sidebar. And then finally we're going to put in the footer. And so once again we want the footer to be after the sidebar but still inside the main container div. So I'm going to click right there, after the end div for the sidebar but before the end div for the container, and we are going to insert layout objects, div tag, and my ID is going to be footer. We click new CSS rule and click OK here again, and we come to box. Our width is once again going to be 920 pixels. We don't need to float it, but we do need to clear it. And clear is basically when you want to make sure that something's going to be below everything else. You put clear both. And that makes sure that this thing is going to go below the main text story and also the sidebar. So that's what I want there. Oh, and I also want to set a height. I'm going to set a height of 50 pixels because we just want our footer to be like a little strip across the bottom. And then finally we go to background, and my color for this happens to be this. And there we go. And we click OK. And so now you can see here, if we go back into design view, you can see that we've got like a pretty decent looking page. And what we can do now is we can start pasting stuff into the masthead. We could put our main story into the main text box. We can put stuff into the footer at the bottom, and we can put stuff into the sidebar. And you'll notice that, once again, since I didn't set a height for most of these, if I go into my main text and delete that little placeholder text that Dreamweaver puts in there, if I just start typing text here, you can see that my main story div automatically expands to make room for that. Same thing here under the sidebar. If I go into the sidebar and delete that holder text and then come here and just type some stuff, my sidebar is going to expand. So that's basically how you do the layout, and it's essentially made up of 5 boxes: the container, the masthead, the main story, the sidebar, and finally at the bottom the footer.